Hey everyone, thank you for joining and welcome to today's webinar on how to effectively visualize survey data. I'm Vanessa and today's host is Simona, who's a content specialist here at Flourish. And just a few rules before we get started. Feel free to always ask questions through the chat and I can get back to you there. If you need any more information, go to our webinar page and also sign up to get email notifications. And now over to Simona who get us started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Simona, and I'm very excited to see so many of you here today. Hopefully, we're having a very exciting session for all of you. In the next hour, we'll cover anything and everything survey data. We're going to start with just a little bit of information of what kind of survey questions we might come across when we're preparing our own survey or when we're kind of like filling out other people's surveys. And then we're going to jump straight into a Flourish practical demo. Today, the webinar will be split into kind of like two sections. The first 20-25 minutes or so will be all about the Flourish survey template, which is kind of like a very unique template. And since it's our topic's namesake, we thought we should kind of like show you how you can create your own survey story with Flourish. And then we're going to move on into like different survey questions and what type of charts actually kind of like go with each survey response and each survey question. And the second demo that we will be seeing today is how to create a likert scale chart in Flourish. So quite a few practical things. If you're very new to Flourish, please don't worry about it. This session is recorded and will be available on YouTube. Also, the data set that I'm going to be using today is a publicly available data set. So if anything isn't clear, you can always kind of like download exactly the same spreadsheet that I am going to be using today and just play around as well in your own free time. So hopefully in the end, you will know how to visualize survey data with Flourish efficiently and beautifully. So we have so many things to talk about today. So I'm starting right in with understanding survey responses and what kind of survey responses you might see when we're talking about survey questionnaires. Now, if you're a professional that kind of conducts surveys on, on often basis, or you're filling surveys as well, obviously this will not be news to you, but I just wanted to go over the different types of survey questions that you might come across, because the rest of the session is also split by each of those kind of like survey questions and which chart type goes with which. So for convenience, we're going to go quickly through all of them. The first and kind of like very common type of survey question that you might see is a binary or a closed-ended question. Such questions are usually kind of, would you recommend our service to a colleague, or did you enjoy something? Usually these questions can be answered with yes or no, or for example, you have like a set of answers that you can choose from and you only have one option. So for example, you can have a question which is like, what's your favorite streaming platform, for example, and you have the right to choose out of like 10, just one. The second type of survey questions are open-ended questions. Those questions, in a way, provide kind of like the biggest amount of qualitative data when we're talking about surveys. So those questions usually look like, how would you describe your experience with, or like, what do you think about anything? And you have the option to kind of like type in your response. You can't choose from like a specific set of answers. And usually these questions are quite elaborative as well. So for example, if you select other, in most cases, you can, like, the survey conductors usually ask you to elaborate and kind of like explain more why you chose other as an option. Then we have multiple choice questions. Those questions usually just end with select all that apply, and you can always kind of like choose more than one answer. So if we compare it to the first question that we just saw, like the closed-ended, this example would be, which of these streaming sites have you heard of, for example, and you can choose more than one. And last but not least, we have the Likert scale survey questions. Those are essentially, again, a single choice questions. However, I think we should classify them slightly differently, just because these questions are specifically designed to kind of capture sentiment and really, like analyze the level of agreement with a particular statement, or yeah, something like that. So just because they have kind of like their own chart type as well, especially in Flourish, we have a starting point about Likert scale survey questions. I thought we should kind of like look at them separately. And basically, these kind of 4 types of survey questions are usually the most often way for people to ask questions when it comes to surveys. And once you kind of collected your survey data and cleaned your data set and like found out what's your data story, then we're coming to the point, okay, we need to visualize those insights. How do I do this? Do I use, as I mentioned already, a Likert scale chart, or do I use a bubble chart, or maybe a map, or a heat map, or a pictogram, or anything like that? Obviously, these questions, depend from data set to data set, but the good news that I can give you today is that all of those visualizations are created with Flourish, and all of this is possible to be created within the same tool, which is exactly what we will be seeing today. Just we're going to give a bit more of a kind of like a practical guidance, which chart type is suitable for which type of survey question. But before we kind of go into the very specific survey questions and what can be used to visualize them, I would like for us to start with the survey template, because as explained, this is like something that we at Flourish offer, and it's like quite a unique kind of like visualization type, which is exactly specifically designed to visualize survey data. What does the survey template do is, instead of like showing just aggregated results, as usually you would see in a bar chart, for example, or anything like that, it shows individual responses, which is quite cool because in specific circumstances, you kind of get a visual idea of how big the survey sample was, for example, and you can see kind of those super nice animated transitions between different views that you can create entirely within the survey template. And in specific cases, I think this is a really useful and cool way for people to engage with your data. So if I can summarize the 3 kind of like top use cases of the survey template, this is to obviously visualize individual responses, which also comes with like another benefit, in my opinion, which is that in a way it actually humanizes your data. Because when we're talking about survey responses, and when we're usually talking about kind of like questionnaires and aggregated results, we tend to talk about trends and insights that we have noticed. But in some cases, it's actually very interesting to see who actually stands behind your survey questionnaire and your survey data. And in other use cases, when we're not even using kind of the survey template only for survey data, as we've done here, like we use the survey template to visualize the Windrush's passengers, it really provides a bit more kind of like an effective result of the data story, just because you can actually see who are the people that we're kind of like visualizing and talking about. In addition, you can also use multiple different ways to visualize and group your data. As I mentioned again, directly into the survey template, which is really cool. We're going to be seeing this in just a second. And last but not least, you can also let the reader explore the data themselves, because the survey template actually comes with this little menu here on the right, which basically allows your readers to actually play around with your data set and see different kind of like aggregations of the data and maybe find their own conclusion and insights. So another very interesting creative use of the survey template we have been noticing recently is something that we did with Canva for last year for the visual economy report that they created, which is basically just a survey that basically analyzed how visual communication impacts business organizations. And as you can see here in the first like 5 pages, they use the survey template to visualize their methodology, which I think is like a super creative use case of the survey template as well. Just as I mentioned, like it really shows you who is behind those survey responses, where are they based, what's their location or gender or demographic information, etc. And I think it's just a very fun thing because I haven't necessarily seen people paying too much attention to the way they present the methodology. Usually this is just like a separate page or a separate doc in a report, whereas this really kind of like proves the importance of visual communication. So I think this is really cool. And today I would like to show you something really similar to what we just saw in Canva's visual economy report. I would showcase now how we can create the survey visualization in Flourish. And for today's demo, I am going to be using the State of the Industry survey created by the Data Visualization Society, just because I thought it might be quite relevant for us to actually look at data visualization data and survey. I'm going to be using the data from 2022, which is readily available here. You can get the data yourself. And after today's session, you're going to get a link to those slides, so they're at your own kind of disposal. So I am just quickly going to stop for a second and confirm that you see my screen. Yes, you should be able to. So yeah. So the State of the Industry survey is a very, very comprehensive survey that basically questions more than 1,500 people over sometimes, I think, 70 plus questions, if I'm not mistaken. So you can see I just keep scrolling and scrolling, and the data set is humongous, but it's extremely interesting. And I thought this is a very good example because obviously when you're working with smaller data sets, things get a bit easier. But when we are having a huge data set, things, like at first, we might be a bit overwhelmed with like the size and the sample of the data. But at the end of the day, as with any data visualization and with any data set, like the importance is like just spotting trends and patterns. I'm not going to dive deep too much into like cleaning the data set, etc. Actually, in fact, for today's demo, to make things just a little bit easier, I have prepared just a couple of columns that we will be using for the survey template. And throughout the demo, we will be using different kind of like bits and pieces from this data set just to keep things clear and straightforward. So as I mentioned, we would like to visualize kind of like the people behind this survey. So we have information such as their country of origin, whether they're employees at a company or organization, or whether they work as freelancers, or whether they're students, etc. How many years of data viz experience do they have? And if they're employees, what's their role within their company? So are they on a leadership role, or are they developers, analysts, etc.? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I am just going to download my file as a CSV. And once this is done, I am going to head straight into Flourish. Now here, I'm going to click on a new visualization. And the survey template is a little bit at the bottom, right here. As you can see, we have quite a few different starting points. However, regardless of which one you choose, you can always end up creating a different starting point. But those starting points are quite useful, like indicators to just help you to get to the final result a little bit quicker. And because I have geographical location, I'm actually going to click with map. And here is, we already have this kind of like blueprint data. If you are familiar with Flourish, you know that each template kind of comes with some starting point, just so you can go to the data tab and get to understand how your data set should be structured in order for the template to work properly. And in the case of the survey template, we need one row per respondent in your survey, and each column kind of represents a different question or anything like that. And don't get too overwhelmed with like the abundance of data sheets we have in the survey template. Usually our Flourish templates have just one or two, three data tabs here. The survey template is a bit of an exception, but we're going to go through those in today's demo. So hopefully things will be a bit more straightforward and clear at the end. So the first thing, I'm just going to clear my sheet here, and I am going to drag and drop the data set that I just downloaded. Continue, import, and you can see that my visualization just kind of like was born here. The next step is that I need to bind the columns that I have in my data set. So the main three column bindings that are very important for a survey visualization are the categorical columns, which are obviously the ones that contain text or categorical data. In our case, this is the country, so column B, the data viz role, whether people are employees or freelancers, and the role as an employee, so column E. On the other hand, we have only one numerical column or continuous column, which is column D, because it's the year of data visualization experience, and we will be able to size by this column. That's why we're binding only numerical columns here. And for geographical column, we only have one column containing geographical data, which is column B for country. So the reason why I kind of selected the map starting point just a second ago is because now that I have bound here a geographical column B, this geographical column kind of like speaks to the information we have here in this sheet under places. The template comes populated with the latitude and longitude of like each country. So now, basically, now that I have provided a geographical column in my data set and we have this information here, if I go to the visualization and choose the map point of view, I should be able to see my respondents on a map. At the moment, we don't, because we have so many respondents that actually the stroke width that's like 1 by default actually kind of like distorts our view. But if I choose the stroke width down to 0, you can see that now we have our survey respondents here. So quick and easy. All you need is just a geographical column, and obviously just you need to make sure that like the column names actually match to in both data sheets. But yeah, actually just gonna get rid of the label here, and I'm gonna go back to the preview and gonna click again on the original kind of like point of view, and I'm gonna start from scratch to kind of like explain things a little bit properly. So the survey template can obviously group and provides different views of your data set. And you can group by all the columns that we kind of like chose as categorical. So for example, I can group by like data visualization role, collapsed, etc. And this is how like each of my data set groups, or I can size by my numerical column, which in my case is the years of data visualization experience. And you can see like in a better view that, for example, like my bubbles now are like different in size. In the same way, I can shade by my categorical columns, but I can't by numerical because the survey template at the moment doesn't support numerical shading. It only supports categorical. So what I mean by this is that even if I have numbers here, if I bind the years of database experience as a categorical column, each number will have its own little color. So basically, here is where like our column bindings come into place. And now with the groupings, I can, for example, group by country. Yes, however, we actually come across the first problem of today's data set, which is the fact that we have so many countries in our survey that this grouping and this visualization just doesn't tell us anything meaningful. In fact, we can barely see any of our responses and our bubbles. I think this is kind of like a very common problem when it comes to survey data, and your kind of option here is to just combine or aggregate your data in something slightly more meaningful. So for example, instead of us having 25 or 30 different countries, we can group those countries by continent. And this is exactly what we're going to do. However, if I go back to my data set and take a look at the data set that we have from the DataVis Society, you can see that we don't actually have continent information for our country. So what I can do is I can find a data set and like create a VLOOKUP formula on Google Sheets and try to kind of like match each row with its relevant continent, etc., etc. Or I can do something even faster, which is actually do this directly in Flourish. So in here, I have a separate spreadsheet, which is containing 2 columns. The first one is the responding continent of every country in the world. This dataset, by the way, is also linked in the slides. So it's a very handy spreadsheet in case you need it for survey data. But yeah, basically, here is my data. I have each country in the world and its responding continent. What I can do is, in a very similar manner, just download this spreadsheet as a CSV file. And when I go back to my survey visualization, instead of re-uploading this spreadsheet, I'm gonna click here and I'm gonna click on Upload Data and Merge. This function allows me to merge two data sets. The first one that I already have here and I've uploaded, and the second one that I just downloaded. So if I actually click here and select my spreadsheet, you see in this pop-up window, I have a few options. The first one is I need to select a column from each spreadsheet and basically match them together. So this is kind of like the reference column. And in our case, this will be the country, because in our original data set from the survey data, we have the country data here. And in the second spreadsheet that I just downloaded, we have two columns. One is a continent, which obviously wouldn't have any matches at the moment with our original spreadsheet, and the country. And even here in this little preview window, you can see my new column continent here. It gives you like a handy preview to see how things look like. And despite the fact that we actually have like repeating values, each row has its own like responding continent here, which is exactly what I want. And you will be able to see that actually kind of prompts me that there are 184 rows in my current data that don't have a match. But I actually don't have a problem with this. I know which are those inputs. I'm going to start by column A to Z, and you will be able to see here that obviously in my survey data, I have a couple of answers, not a couple, a few, that didn't answer the question or didn't finish it. That's why, of course, like these answers cannot be matched to a continent. Simple as that. However, not to worry, I don't have a problem with this, because what I'm going to do now is, now that I've merged my continent column, instead of being able to group by country, I'm just going to be able to group by continent here. And if I go back to the preview and just quickly click on group by continent, you will be able to see here that now all my respondents are grouped by the relevant continent. And actually, to make things even more clear, I'm going to go to groups here and order groups by size. So now click on largest to smallest. So North America is at the very top here. And as you can see, now we have things, but like much more kind of like elaborative as opposed to what we had a couple of seconds ago. As you can see here, though, we have like one blank column, because here we have all those people that didn't answer the question, where are you from? I can simply click here, exclude groups with blank names, and this is it. I don't have to clear my spreadsheet. I don't have to kind of like get rid of values, inputs, etc. All I need to is exclude groups with blank names, and that's it. In a similar manner, by the way, if you have like groups such as unasked and unfinished, as we have here as a row as an employee, you can just write them down here, like as long as they match, like the input matches, and they're going to disappear. I'm going to show you this in just a couple of seconds. So in a very similar manner, obviously the same thing we did with the country, I'll probably have to do the same with like the data viz roles. Here, if we actually look at this kind of like different views, or maybe no, maybe group this a bit better for you to kind of like see this a bit bigger. You can see here that we have things like, if you're an employee, you're an employee, okay, but you can be also freelance, but you can be an employee and a hobbyist, or an employee and academic, or just an academic, etc., etc. And even if I shade by this, like that, things are still a little bit more complicated, because like for a random reader, freelance and might not mean anything. So in that case, whenever you kind of like start thinking about visualizing your data, again, I emphasize the importance of aggregating some columns. For that specific example, I actually did this outside of Flourish. So as you can see here, in my original data set, I have quite a few options for people to choose from, such as, again, academic, employee, or employee and freelance, etc. What I did is I actually created an aggregated column that basically groups each of them into things that are a bit more understandable for the generic audience, which are employee, employee or freelance, just a freelance, or other. And I did exactly the same for the years of data visualization experience. I aggregated them into kind of like a bit more meaningful, like 1 to 5 years or 10 to 15 years of data viz experience, just because in these kind of cases, I guess when we don't have numerical shading, having groups is much better than having individual values and numbers, because there might be just one person that has 21 years of data visualization experience. So again, I'm going to do exactly the same exercise. Just very quickly, I'm going to download my data set. Oops, that was a bit of a spoiler. And I'm going to upload data and merge so we can add our aggregated columns that I just showed you. And doing exactly the same exercise that I just did with the countries, but here I am binding by unique reference ID. This is something that like the survey, kind of like the survey input literally provided for for each survey respondent, and there are no surprises here. Like we don't have any errors or rows that cannot be merged. Here is it. And however, because now I uploaded a bigger spreadsheet, we just have a couple of duplicated columns. I'm just going to quickly delete them so it's a bit clearer. What am I doing? Going to delete this one. A row as an employee, we already have that, so I'm deleting this. And now, instead of having all those column bounds, again, I'm just going to bind the aggregated columns that we need. So that will be column E to H. And here it is. So now things look slightly more clearer than what they looked a couple of seconds ago. The same happens with the data viz roles. Here is, for example, we now have only 4 categories, and we can see that the biggest part of our survey respondents was actually an employee in an organization, followed by freelance, other like academics and students, and both employees and freelance. And now, last but not least, as I mentioned, if I would like to kind of like group by role as an employee, for example, you will see here that I have exactly the ones that I mentioned, like the unfinished or unasked, etc. And I want to exclude those groups. What am I going to do is I'm just going to find them in my spreadsheet. I'm going to copy this column and paste it here with a comma. And you see that like the unfinished column group kind of a thing just disappeared straight away from my spreadsheet. The same will happen with the unasked. Unasked at the moment is like the second one, the largest one actually, here, and that disappeared. This is how you basically kind of get rid of outliers or things in your data set that just simply don't make any sense, and you don't want them visualized in this particular moment. Last tip that I wanted to share with you is in case that you have like very long labels, such as this one, for example, none of these describes my role, or like the leadership, like we specify here. I'm going to go back to a group view just so you can see a bit better. You can see here that like the leadership specify whether you're a manager, director, etc., etc. In order, just for aesthetics and like readability, I can shorten this label, and I don't have to like Control F and replace and re-upload the spreadsheet. The only thing I need is this spreadsheet, like this data here, called label overrides. What I can do is paste the original label under column A and like specify a label to display. In this case, I just want leadership, just for shortening purposes. And as you can see here, this is exactly what happened. Now my visualization is a bit more like pretty and easy to read. And the last thing I'm showing is when we're talking about labels of the survey template, a very handy thing that you can do is go under group labels here and show number of dots in a group, and also show the group size of percentage of dots. Which, what does it do? It basically automatically calculates the sample that, or like kind of how big the group that you're looking at actually is. And we can see here that out of all survey respondents, 410, actually, you know, out of the all employees that were the survey respondents, we have 410 or almost 40% were actually employed as an analyst. 20%, almost 20% were like in a leadership position, followed by designers, developers, etc., etc. So in a very quick nutshell, because the survey template can do so many other and very crazy different things, but like at the end of the day, we have so much more to kind of like see in today's webinar. This is kind of like a very big like introduction to what the template is capable of, and it's extremely powerful. The only thing I want to emphasize on the survey template is if you create a visualization, as I just did, and export and publish it and embed it on your website, every time your web page loads or presentation or window, the initial view of the survey visualization will be this. It won't kind of like save what you have chosen here in the drop-down menu. However, if you would like to start with like a custom way of showing your survey data set, all you need to do is basically create a story. And the difference between the Flourish standalone visualizations and the Flourish story is that the Flourish story can actually possesses the ability to save what you have chosen as a starting point. So in this case here, for example, I can group by row as an employee, close this, and now if I refresh my story, you will see that this has saved. And if I embed this, if I, let's say, only need one slide, I don't need this kind of like navigation menu, I can go here and click none. So this essentially becomes a single visualization. Or if I want a story, so with like a couple of different views, what we just saw like a couple of seconds ago, I can duplicate the slide. I don't need to create a new survey or like create 20,000 different surveys. I can just duplicate and, for example, shade by continent and position this on a map, for example, or something like that. And then continue duplicating and the size by something. So you can like, let's say, for example, I don't know how much sense that kind of like current state makes, but let's say for the demo purposes, you can see that like in the end, you basically have a couple of different views and you're creating essentially your own little data story. And this is the final result here in this kind of like example that I shared in the slides. I played around a little bit more. For example, here I kind of like created this kind of numerical color palette, which is a workaround when like we're talking that the survey template doesn't support numerical shading. So for example, you can duplicate and edit this story that you're seeing here in your own Flourish account and just look around, see what kind of like settings we have chosen, what kind of like information we have specified here, and you can literally use this as a starting point for your own survey. And of course, like here, the two data sets that I've used, the state of the industry and the countries and continents. So fingers crossed, hopefully that wasn't too crazy. One more thing before we move on. We have another template that works in very, very similar way to the survey template. It's called the Data Explorer template, and it's a premium template. So basically, users on our business plans have access to it. The main difference between the Data Explorer and the survey templates is that unlike the survey, the Data Explorer actually supports numerical shading and you can create scatter plots with them. So they're really, really great to dive deep into your data and basically look, even in my opinion, if you have a data set, if you're not sure kind of like what insights you can get from your survey responses, you can literally pop it into the Data Explorer template and kind of start exploring and see what you can find yourself. So I highly recommend it, and equally powerful as our survey. So before I move on, I just kind of want to stop for a second and ensure that there are no questions in the chat or
I think everything all good for now.
Okay.
The only question we got if you can maybe slow down a tiny bit at times, but then I think
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. Thank you for the feedback. I do know that I tend to speak so quickly, but there is a chance of me overrunning a little bit as well. But thank God that we have the recording. So hopefully, everything will become a bit clear. Okay, so the next step, actually, I think I hurried up too much. The next part of our webinar will cover the different type of survey questions that we kind of just saw in the beginning. which is starting with the visualizations of open-ended questions. So, for example, in the same State of the Industry survey by the Database Society, there was an open question which basically allows the respondents to provide information and feedback on what are the go-to persons for each respondent when it comes to data visualization. And people had the right to write down like multiple names, unlimited, like as much of like data viz heroes as they want. And whenever we're talking about qualitative data, we're always thinking probably first about word clouds. Word clouds are great, and I personally like them a lot. But if you have joined other webinars of ours, or like, have read about like different chart types, you probably know that the word clouds should be used with care when it comes to, specific insights and actions, because while they're visually attractive and they do provide essentials at a glance, such as like keywords and things like that, major themes, they can also be quite misleading. Because, for example, depending on the color you're using for specific keywords, they may look more prominent and more important than others. Or, for example, if you have, as in our case, we were working with people's names, some people might have very long names, which kind of like reduces the space for this name, or on the contrary, kind of like takes a lot of space on screen, so it looks more important than actually is. And they're generally just not analytically accurate in a nutshell. They can't necessarily give you actionable insights in a way that numerical data usually would. And speaking about numerical or quantitative data, we usually come across the following question. Okay, so if word clouds are not great for like actionable insights, how then we turn qualitative data into actual numbers? I guess the answer of this question can be like multi-faced, and like honestly, I am sure many people have their own ways of working. However, like this guide that I came across on the internet, this is not something that I have created. So I have linked to the creator of this article here. But in most cases, when it comes to qualitative data, and especially when it comes to open-ended questions, the only thing you need to do is basically create a spreadsheet, put all the responses on the left, and create a column, like separate columns that basically group your information into teams. And whenever you have like a team that kind of like appears or is included in the response in question, you basically kind of like mark it, and in the end, you can get the total for each team. Whether this is the actual number of respondents that, exist in this particular category, or whether this is in percentage, this is kind of the way to quantify your qualitative data. Obviously, in most cases, this is quite a manual task, and it might take a long time. Even for the purposes of like the word cloud, it does take a while for us to like kind of make sure that there are no typos in people's names, etc., etc. But in the end of the day, this is also kind of like a very normal thing when it comes to survey responses. However, like if we take exactly the same data set that we saw as a word cloud and we quantify it in a way, we can actually spot something, in my opinion, more interesting than just looking at names on a screen. And that is that women comprise almost 40% of all the kind of like the data viz heroes and role models that were mentioned in our data set. And for example, as a pictogram, you can even customize the pop-ups and basically see how many people and who was mentioned in responses, or you can actually get an idea of how many people we're actually talking about. Because when we were looking at the word cloud, you can't necessarily start counting each name and trying to get the idea of how many people we're talking about. On a very similar note, I think my slide just... on a very similar note, you can create a bubble chart and not only kind of like size the bubbles according to numbers mentioned, but you can also create an animated story that basically then positions the bubbles on an axis. And here you can really see, okay, so the two people that were, mentioned a lot in this survey responses were Alberto Cairo and Stephanie Evergreen, which is something that I personally think is like more kind of like recognizable and provides a more clear insight than just looking at the word cloud and trying to compare the size of each name. And by the way, these are the two templates that we just saw as an example, the pictogram and the bubble chart, both available in Flourish. So if you're interested, you can always kind of like read more about them on our blogs and see what are the most suitable use cases for each. But this is kind of like the benefit of why you can quantify your qualitative data. And once you turn your data into numbers, the options for visualizations are literally limitless. In my opinion, you can do bar charts, you can do pie charts, you can do pictograms, bubble charts, scatter plots, literally anything and everything. Whereas, of course, if you're keeping the data in a qualitative format, things are just a little bit more limited, like in my opinion. But we at Flourish are trying to kind of provide users with every option possible out there. So we do have quite a few qualitative templates. And we also had both a webinar and a blog post about how to visualize qualitative data with Flourish without having to turn it into numerical data. So if you're interested, you can read more about this on our website. And moving on with another type of survey question, this is the multiple choice and Likert scaled questions. As I mentioned, the multiple choice questions are the ones that are usually with like select all that apply. And if you come across like these kind of like multiple choice or single choice questions, regardless, I bet that the most common way for people to visualize survey responses is with bar charts. And I don't see anything wrong with that, to be honest, just because bar charts are just like a great, beautiful, easy, simple, get the job done chart type, in my opinion. And in Flourish, for example, they support quite a few things, including a color overrides. So for example, here we've highlighted the top two data visualization tools across work modes. You can also create a filter, so to kind of compare whether we see like the same trend across like different work modes or whether we see something different, such as like in the freelance responses, etc. But you can also create a stacked bar chart. So in comparison to what we saw just a couple of seconds ago, here you can actually see, oh, okay, out of like all the respondents that are employees, more than half are actually using Excel and 40% are using Tableau, etc., etc. And this kind of provides a bit more context for you to actually understand in the context of the whole sample, how many people are actually using data visualization tools. So bar charts are extremely useful and I love them. But talking about stacked bar charts, we're coming to the main character of today's also webinar, which is the Likert scale chart. As you can see here, the Likert scale is also a bar chart. In fact, it is a stacked bar chart. However, the reason why, again, we give it a bit more kind of like a special attitude and like we treat it a bit differently is because the Likert scale is specifically designed to capture level of agreement with a specific statement. So in our case here, for example, we have the statement, leadership in my organization has a strong understanding of the value of database. And we can see whether people are more likely to agree or disagree with this statement. Of course, like in some cases, you have more than like 5 options, etc. But in the end of the day, you can kind of like get an understanding of whether people agree, disagree with a particular statement and really find some insights based on this. And the reason why they're also kind of like special is because the color scheme also plays a very big role within this chart type in comparison to like the traditional bar charts where like in all fairness, like you can use quite a few, like any color palette as long as it's, you know, like accessibility friendly and fits your branding, etc. Oops, sorry. But yeah, if I have to summarize, obviously the Likert scale charts are also bar charts, but they're specifically designed to visualize responses from Likert scale survey questions and show distribution of sentiment. They also come in different shapes and forms. Like you can also find a diverging stack bar chart to kind of illustrate the balance of opinion towards is it more positive or negative, etc. Whereas the original, like the traditional bar charts, they basically are just representatives of categorical data, and the length of or the height of the bar is proportional to the value they represent. Simple as that. Now we're going to go into the second demo of Flourish today. We're going to create a Likert scale chart. Hopefully this is much easier process than creating a survey with so yeah, I hope we have time also to not overrun. This is going to be like the final thing that we create. And with the survey, similar to the survey template, you have the option to actually duplicate and edit this visualization to kind of see like the nitty-gritty parts of the settings and how we created it. But what am I going to do is I'm going to go to the Flourish app again. And here under the line bar and pie charts, we have this drop-down button, show more. And this is exactly what I was talking about a second ago, that you can actually create a diverging stacked bar chart or just a bar chart. So we have starting points for those. So if, in case you would like to create the similar chart type, you can always start with this. What am I going to use for today, though, is the Likert scale, the traditional kind of like Likert scale chart. And similar to the survey that we just saw, the moment I open the visualization, I kind of already see what the final result will look like. I can see how my data is being structured here. So in order for me to achieve this with the data set I have here in the DataVis survey, I can show you. For example, this is how my visualization, this is how my data set look as an original. I have the row as an employee on a separate role, and how much do they agree with the statement about the importance of data viz. And you can see what is the structure. And in order for me to do something similar to the Likert scale chart here, the only thing I did is basically creating a pivot table in Google Sheets. And I also calculated the mean of like agreement or disagreement with the particular statement. So we can actually see how you can plot a mean into the Likert scale as well. And so what am I going to do is I'm literally going to copy paste those values here and clear my sheet again, paste my data, and here it is. Now, as you can see though, Flourish bound all the columns automatically, including the mean, which is something I don't want at the moment. So I'm gonna just unbind this column and put it B to F. And as you can see here, if I go to my preview, you can spot that the visualization is basically almost ready, kind of a thing. Obviously, we have quite a few things that we can improve. The first thing is that although in my data set, I'm actually providing the exact number of people that have specified the level of agreement, strongly disagree, etc., etc. This means like 19 engineers actually agree with the statement in question. My Flourish chart actually shows me values in percentage. So this is because I have selected the stack percentage starting point here. So in order for me to make this a bit clearer, I'm just gonna go to the number formatting and I'm gonna click make a suffix here. So now even the pop-ups and my y-axis actually shows percentage, which makes things a bit more straightforward to understand. In comparison, another thing that I will do is I would like to change the colors. Now, as you can see here, we have strongly agree currently, currently colored in dark red, but I think it should be the opposite, because dark red usually is kind of like associated with like something a bit more negative or like wrong. So I think that strongly disagree should be dark red and strongly agree should be dark blue. And in order for me to do this, all I need to do is actually just bind the columns in the opposite way. So instead of binding column B to F, all I can do is I can bind column F to B. And if I do that and go back to my data tab, you can see that this is exactly what happened. So we have strongly agree, agree in blue, then white for neutral, etc., and red for like disagreement. So I would like to emphasize the fact that there is an importance of how and in what order you bind your values in the data tab. However, of course, you can always, go to colors and actually change the order of the colors from here. This is another thing that you can do. Or alternatively, you can use custom overrides. So the way the custom overrides work is you provide the name of the column. So for example, strongly disagree. And I always copy paste the exact name just because this is case sensitive and it's quite important that the values, like the spelling, matches. I add a column here. Maybe like this, you can see a bit better. And I just need to write a color. So I can write red, for example. Actually, this is not a very good example. I can write yellow. And you can see that now my strongly disagree custom override is in this weird yellow. So in fact, I'm just going to copy paste the color overrides I've done here because I don't want to waste a lot of time doing that manually. So I just pasted it, and here is my new diverging color legend, going from green to red as opposed from blue to red. And now the last thing that I need to do is just visualize my means. So instead of like having this chart type here, the column chart stack percentage, what I can do is I can open this drop-down menu and head to the very bottom where it says combo charts, lines and columns stacked percentage. When I click here, you will see that this essentially creates a chart with two axes, like a dual axis chart. The only thing is that because we selected the Likert scale starting point in the template chooser, that's why some of the settings here in the preview editor are already tweaked for your convenience, so you don't have to do them manually. So in our case, for example, we have the y-axis that's actually hidden, but if you create a dual axis chart from scratch, this will be visible and you will have to hide it yourself. This is what I'm talking about here. I'm going to hide it back and actually focus on the fact that now, because I selected a dual axis chart, which is supposed to have lines and columns, my strongly agree opinions are actually showing up as dots as opposed to part of the stacked bar. So in order for me to change this, I need to go to my data tab and actually bind column G first, the mean. So the mean displays as a dot as opposed to anything else from those columns here. So this is what I do, G to and then F to B. And here it is. This is my mean. I already put a color override of it here. So that's why it appears as yellow. And you can see here that this is kind of like the mean that basically provides an indication whether people tend to agree or disagree more. And if you would like to increase it, you can head to the lines, dots, and areas and increase the radius to whatever you want, 0.65, etc. Of course, you can do many different things, like you can add a background color, header, source, footer, subtitle, etc. But I think all these kind of things are a bit more aesthetic as opposed to how Flourish template actually works. But essentially, this is how you create a Likert scale chart. So the final result is here. And again, I have linked to the duplicate and edit button, which you can use and duplicate the same chart into your account. So yeah, to kind of play around and see what we've done a bit, yeah, to improve it. And when we're talking about the means, by the way, if you would like to only showcase the average level of agreement, such as what's essentially what the mean does, you can create a gauge visualization. So this is also like a template available in Flourish, where the only thing we've done is basically plotting the mean, the value of the means, which we've already had calculated anyway, into a gauge, so you can see whether most people agree or disagree with a particular statement in a certain role or organization, etc. And the gauge is also a really good example for when it comes to customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction, kind of like internal survey responses, reports, and things like that. And to finish off with just a couple of more examples about how you can visualize survey data, and with just slightly more creative, I would say, ways. I'm sure you all know like these templates and these chart types, but maybe you haven't thought about them in a survey context. Here are just a couple. Now, the first one is the heat map template, which is, as you can see here, you can create multiple different heat maps in Flourish. You can create a categorical heat map or, like a numerical one. And in the context of survey responses, I think the heat map is very good for visualizing the multiple choice questions. So you can kind of like quickly identify the trends and patterns. So in our case here, for example, you can see immediately that, the engineering team agrees with this statement in question the most, more than any other kind of like group, etc. Also, of course, comes with filters, so you can kind of like focus at one group at a time, etc., customize the pop-ups and anything else. Another option that you can opt for is the choropleth map. So for example, here we have an example of the World Happiness Report that just came out like literally a few weeks ago for this year. And when combined into an auto-playing Flourish story, which is exactly what you're seeing here, you can see this kind of like video-like interaction without me even having to touch anything, which I think is really useful and cool. And of course, in a choropleth map, you can also choose a linear or like a diverging color scale, depending on what you're visualizing. And you can illustrate how people from different countries basically, like differ in their opinions or perspectives. However, with that being said, I just wanted to highly suggest that you go here to our blog post about choosing the right map type for your data. In Flourish, we have so many different map types, but sometimes the fact that you have geographical data doesn't necessarily requires for you to create a map as well. And we kind of like highlight this argument in our blog. So I highly recommend for you to check it out. And last but not least, scatter plots. Obviously, when we're talking about scatter plots in a similar way as with the bar charts, you can create so many different scatter plots. And especially when it comes to survey data, you can create connected dot plots as we've done here, or you can create box plots, violin plots, bubble charts as well. Scatter plots with time filters, so you can see how things progress over time, etc. They're like, again, I'm saying like limitless options. However, I personally find scatters very useful when it comes to survey responses, because they just reveal correlations and kind of like outliers very quickly. And especially when you are working on creating data story and kind of like leading the viewer towards a specific insight, the fact that the template supports annotations and these kind of highlights is extremely useful in the case of exactly like not just survey data, but any type of data. So I think, yeah, the survey template is very, versatile in a similar way as the bar and line and pie charts. And surprisingly enough, we didn't actually overrun that much. I apologize again that I rushed through the demo. Hopefully, things were still quite useful, and I highly recommend you take a look at our recording on YouTube when it's uploaded by the end of the week. But to just kind of like finish off completely and provide a little bit of a cheat sheet of what we covered in the past 1 hour. This is how we started, we had the type of survey questions. So the binary and closed-ended questions, we had the open-ended questions, the multiple choice and the Likert scale. And for each of them, we kind of like looked at different examples and visualization suggestions of what you can do and how you can visualize these types of data. So for binary and closed-ended, obviously you can also go for pie charts. We didn't cover pie charts because sometimes I think you can find more effective ways to visualize your data. But if you have binary questions that can be answered with yes or no, or less than kind of like 4 or 5 categories, a pie chart is also a good option, and you can opt for it. If you have more than 4 or 5 series, I would highly recommend you go for a different chart type. And of course, stacked bar charts are quite prominent, and just bar charts in general in almost everywhere. For open-ended questions, you can always go for like word clouds or other interactive content that we provide in Flourish, such as like number tickers and cards templates. Obviously, not every interactive content template that we provide would be suitable for survey data, but who knows, maybe like once you see something, you can actually get a very cool idea of how to visualize something from your survey responses. Pictograms and bar charts and bubble charts, of course. For multiple choice questions, you can always have like the bar charts as well. They're our best friend, the heat maps and connected scatter plots. And obviously for the Likert scale, we have Likert scale chart and gauge. And if you would like to actually focus on the exploration part of your data, obviously Survey and the Data Explorer are a really good option for that. However, with all that being said, I just want to emphasize that these are just suggestions. Anything else and any other chart type that helps you tell the best data story, depending on your data set, depending on your insights and the trends that you would like to visualize, is the best option out there. Those are just kind of like, just as I mentioned, just some suggestions. A couple of resources, obviously throughout the slides, there are just a few more links as well. But if you're interested to read more about how you can enhance your data stories and Flourish visualizations, these 2 blog posts are quite useful when it comes to data viz tips and tricks. And of course, we have a blog post that actually shows 5 ways to visualize survey data with Flourish, which all of those 5 ways we covered in today's session. And when it comes to help docs, you can always kind of like take a look at our help center and get a step-by-step guide on how to create something that I just kind of like showed you quickly today. I just wanted to, before I hand over to Vanessa, maybe we can spend a couple of minutes if there are some unanswered questions, or we can do it at the end of the webinar. What do you think?
I think there are no unanswered questions at the moment. The only thing that I just spotted in the chat is if there will be a link to the presentation, which will be shared in a few days, either via email so you get an email reminder if you signed up, or you can always find all previous recordings and slides on our webinar page.
Sweet, great. In this case, I'm just gonna move to the next slide.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly mention a few things that have happened in the last month that you might have missed. So last month we published a blog on a visual exploration of gender inequality statistics, just featuring lots of different charts on gender inequality data. And then we have also 2 new pages. One is just on visualizing sports data, and the other one on visualizing election data. So if during this year for the upcoming events and elections, you can find all different templates and everything you can do with Flourish for those things on these pages. And you can also create a radial network graph with our network graph template. And we also have a challenge log where you can always see everything that's new. And I'll paste the links to that in the chat in a minute. And the last thing to say is just that our next webinar will be on visualizing elections. It will be in a month, roughly on the 14th of May, and we will cover both UK and US elections. And you can sign up for our webinar communication to not miss when you can sign up for this webinar, which will be soon. And to always hear everything about webinars first. So thank you very much for joining today. You can always reach out to us and follow us on social media. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining as well for me. We can stick around for just a couple of minutes, just in case there's some last questions. And if not, see you again next month.